Welcome to Wisconsin Shoe Guy. Here we do unboxing videos, we discuss general shoe knowledge, we do worth the price videos as shoe reviews, and we will do shoe battles, comparing shoe to shoe so that you can understand the differences. I also speak to experts in the field. Welcome back. This is Wisconsin Shoe Guy, and today we're going to talk about a very special shoe. This is a Wholecut Oxford. Now, Oxfords are shoes that have a closed facing, and the facing is attached to the rest of the shoe. Wholecuts mean that it's one piece of leather all the way around with a single seam, no seam, or in this case, a patch seam on the back. It's debatable in my mind whether or not this actually counts as a Wholecut, but for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to go ahead and let that slide and just talk about Wholecuts from a style perspective, from a welt perspective in construction, and then talk about some of the things that I look for when I look for a Wholecut to buy. So let's start off with talking about construction for Wholecuts and about how that can impact both the price and the quality. And we're going to start with these. This is a Michael Darren Wholecut. And this is a tier 4 shoe based on my price tiering. These run about $350. And this is a Blake construction. And you can see that it's Blake construction because when you look at the seam, and it is closed channel, meaning that they actually hammer the seam shut, but the seam is actually inside the shoe. And so what Blake McKay construction does, and if it didn't have a full-size sock liner in here, you would be able to actually see it, but it actually does the stitching on the inside of the shoe through the sole, and then they just simply hammer the sole back. And that's Blake or McKay stitching. They call the machine a McKay stitching machine that actually does this, and it is absolutely recraftable. It is high quality, but generally speaking, because there's less components between the sole and the shoe, meaning no cork, there's no gap space either, and there's no welt, they generally cost a little bit less. Now, that's not always the case. There's a lot of Italian shoemakers like Santoni that do a lot of Blake stitching, and they do it because they want to be able to have thinner soles, and they want it to be a sleeker looking shoe. In those cases, it's actually quite a bit more expensive because they're using all of this really, really high quality leather and so forth. Now, this is a good example of an entry-level shoe in the high quality range, $350. Michael Darren, actually quality pretty good. Overall construction I've been pretty happy with. They've got these cool nails here to help with wear. And overall, I've just been really, really happy with it. Now, a Wholecut shoe is hard to make. And so it's something that not every maker will do. And sometimes they'll have perforations in the Wholecut. The last of the Wholecut can be very, very important, which we'll talk about. But for right now, this is a Blake stitched Wholecut, and that is something to kind of keep in mind. Now, we're going to go on to a Goodyear Welt. And Goodyear Welt can be in a lot of different varieties. This is a 270-degree Goodyear Welt, meaning that the welting actually this is probably a 180 based on the fact that the waist is so narrow. And 180 means that just this part here is actually stitched to the sole. Now, inside here, they either do stitching really close to the edge, or they peg it and they hide it. Sometimes they Blake stitch it in the middle, and that's another option as well. These are Kingsman shoes. I suspect that they're made by Alfred Sargent, and a very high quality shoe. These retail at $950 and are quite nice. Now, the heel, of course, is not part of the stitching process and is very, very narrow on these. Now, you can have a lot of different varieties of that, but this is an area where the heels are thin. Now, you have a standard 270 Goodyear Welt like these. This is a Loake Parliament, and this has an open channel on the bottom, and so you can actually see the stitching and where it starts. And this does not have stitching all the way around the heel because it wanted to have a little bit of a narrow heel. However, you can look at the two heels next to each other, and the heel on the Kingsman is much narrower than it is on the Loake. Now, Kingsman is a Cleverly brand, so if you're familiar with George Cleverly, this is part of that that series. So that's another type. Now, lastly, we're going to get into hand welted, and I have two examples that I will consider very similar to hand welted. The first one, this is a Mecariello, and this is actually part of their Goodyear Welted line, but it's not a complete Goodyear Welted. That's why it's kind of in between. This is an Argentum ready to wear, and what he does with this is that he uses a machine to cut out the welt into the, not the welt, but he uses that to cut out the insole so that he can actually stitch the welt to the insole. And then does that work differently. So it's kind of an in-between because he uses the very thick insole that you would get in a hand-welted shoe, but he is using a machine to do the cutting of the insole in order to save time and bring down the cost of the shoe. So this is kind of that in-between shoe. Really nice, different kind of last, which we'll talk about a little later. Very narrow on the heel, but still stitched. So a very nice example of an example in whole cuts. And then this is a Norvegese stitching in a chain lock pattern here. And this is a Meermin, and this is the one with the patch, but this is a hand welted variety. This has a 360-degree Norvegese stitch, and it is in a wide sole, and it is stitched to the sole all the way around. The welt even goes around the heel, making it a more chunky shoe. So some food for thought there. Now, when we talk about lasts, it's important to note that last can mean, the name of the last can mean anything you want, right? A lot of lasts just have names. Some of them have numbers. And so it's hard to understand what they are. But essentially, the last is basically when they pull the shoe over, the leather over a shape in order to make the shape of the shoe. That is the last. So the last will create this shape here, okay? It'll create this shape here, whether it's rectangular, whether it's square, whether it's really at a chisel angle, or whether it's rounded, okay? So you can see, just looking at these shapes, that there are significant changes in the last. So look at these two. We'll look at these two. Okay, very different shapes. Look at these two. All right, even where they're similar in proportion, they're still very, very different shapes. And the shape of this can be a lot of things. Now you have the shape here, but you also have the shape here, okay, and how that is. And that can be a really big impact to how well it fits over your foot, okay? So these two are relatively tight across the vamp, meaning that they don't crease a lot and they hold their shape really, really well. Now, when I get into some of the ones that have larger around the welt, or excuse me, around my forefoot, they can crease quite a bit, and so you start seeing some of these rolls. Now, it's not bad, all of these shoes fit, but it is a difference in how well they wear. And then different materials are gonna wear differently, right? The suede really stretches out every time you put the shoe trees in and kind of bounces back better. So the waves in the leather don't show as much. This is a very, very thin leather, so it does show, although you can see this is also a fairly good fit, so I don't have a lot there. There are trees in them, so when I wear them, you can definitely tell. And then this is another one that has a relatively narrow top line here, or top across the vamp here. And that keeps it well suited for me. So this is an Enzo Benafe. This is also a hand welted shoe, but this is a flat welt, not a Norvegese stitch that the other one was, and provides another example here. Also 270. So the welting stops, the stitching on the stops here, and then it goes along to the side for the heel is just nailed on. So you've got some really, really interesting examples there. So the lasts can create a lot of differences in the shoes. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move some of the lasts together that are more similar, so you can kind of see where they I'm gonna do this so that it's more of a gradual change, right? So you look at these, and you can see how the shape is what they call a soft chisel, okay? Then here, this is more of, this has a little bit more of a rounded edge to it. This has more of the chisel, but it's rounded up here on the toe. Okay, this also has a medallion, which these two are the only ones that I have with medallions and a hole cut. Something that I like, and I may actually get when I break into my tier 1 hole cuts. Now these are both rounded, but this one is a much narrower in the toe. So that's a difference. This is the hawksbill last, which when you look at it this way, has that very cool shape up here. Okay. And then of course you have the Elton last from Meermin, which has this layer and this little ridge here, which is kind of a cool look all in itself. Very high instep, you know, which is a great fit for a lot of guys. Okay. So some other things to look at when you're looking at these shoes, because they are very plain, right, is you look at the heel and you look at how the heel is constructed and what kind of details are there. So you have, this is pretty much your standard, okay? You have a single seam. This has a seam on either side of the seam, and it has the little flap here. We talked about this one before with the little patch, okay? This has a reverse seam, so there's actually no stitching on the outside, and the flap, okay? So that's different. This is gonna be the same, reversed seam. This is a hand-grade Crockett and Jones, so very, very minimalist in the way that it's constructed, okay? This is your seam on both sides and then your flap. This is your seam on both sides and then your flap. This flap has a squared off edge to it, which is similar to most Crockett and Jones mainline, but not to the hand grade. And then this is the seam on both sides and the flap. So things that you want to look at as you're looking at these shoes. So that is 7 examples of hole cuts. And this is the first in a series of 2 videos that I'm going to do on plain toe shoes. Okay, the next one is all going to be about plain toe derbies, because I don't own any plain toe Oxfords other than hole cuts. But that's an intentional thing that I do as well as part of my collection strategy. But they do make like a traditional Oxford that's in the multiple pieces. I just don't own any because I'm trying to make my collection really focused around hole cuts, Adelaides, and split toes. And then if I do have a non-hole cut Oxford, non-Adelaide Oxford, it's generally a wingtip. So thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. Let me know what you think. And let me know if there's something that you like when you're looking for hole cuts and what's important to you. My next foray into hole cut is going to be a seamless hole cut. And I've been looking at a couple different makers, but I'm thinking I'm probably going to go with St. Crispin's back into the tier 1 category to try that out. They're very, very pricey. They're very, very difficult to make. The way St. Crispin's describes it on their website is it's the shoe that they take the most pride in of all of the shoes. They're very, very fussy about that particular shoe. I'm interested in your thoughts. What color should I look for in a seamless hole cut? Let me know what you think. And thanks again.